I thought our divorce was the end of the story. I was wrong. It was just the beginning of her masterpiece. My ex-wife, a woman I once loved, launched a viral podcast about healing from a toxic marriage. The catch? The monster in her story, the narcissistic villain she describes to millions of listeners, is me. And a legal document from our divorce forbids me from saying a single word in my own defense. How do you fight a lie that's become a global sensation when the truth is the one thing you're not allowed to speak? You have to listen to this all the way to the end to believe the shocking truth I found buried in our past, and how I used it to burn her empire to the ground. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch! The first time I heard my life story turned into a lie, I was mixing the audio for a local band in my small studio, tucked away in a quiet suburb just outside of Austin, Texas. It was a Tuesday. My soundproofed walls were supposed to keep the world out, but the world came for me anyway, through a pair of high-end studio monitors. My assistant, a kid named Kevin who was way too online, had put on a podcast while he was wrapping cables. "Dude, you gotta hear this," he'd said. "This woman is blowing up. She's like a self-help guru, but raw. It's called Unbreakable." Then I heard her voice. A voice I knew better than my own. A voice that had once whispered promises in my ear and later spat venom in a lawyer's office. It was my ex-wife, Isabella. He had this way of making you feel like you were the crazy one. Isabella's voice, smooth and earnest, filled my studio. He'd do something cruel, like forget our anniversary, and when I'd get upset, he'd look at me with this wounded expression and say, "You're so emotional. I was just busy with work. Why do you always have to make everything a drama?" It was classic gaslighting. He was chipping away at my sanity, one piece at a time. My blood ran cold. I remembered that anniversary. I hadn't forgotten it. I'd been working a 70-hour week to pay for the down payment on the house she wanted. And when I came home, exhausted, with a simple bouquet of flowers instead of the extravagant weekend getaway she'd demanded, she had locked herself in the bathroom for 3 hours. But in her version, the version being streamed to millions of people, I was the villain. I was a textbook narcissist. I told Kevin to turn it off. He looked at me confused. "What's wrong, Nate? You look like you've seen a ghost." "That's my ex-wife," I mumbled, and the words felt like ash in my mouth. Our divorce had been finalized a year ago. It was brutal. Isabella, a woman who radiated charm like a heat lamp, could be terrifyingly cold and manipulative behind closed doors. She had a way of twisting reality until you started to question your own memories. Was I being unreasonable? Was I too sensitive? Was I the problem? By the end, I was a wreck of a man, hollowed out and confused. To escape, I'd agreed to her terms. She got the house, a significant portion of my savings, and one other thing: a non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. A steel-trap NDA that meant I could never, ever speak publicly about her or our marriage. At the time, I thought it was a small price to pay for my freedom. I just wanted peace. I had no idea she was buying my silence so she could have a monopoly on the narrative. That night, I went home and listened to every episode of Unbreakable. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. She never used my name, of course. She was too clever for that. She just referred to my ex, her toxic partner, the man who almost broke her. But the details were ours, twisted into grotesque caricatures. The time I encouraged her to go back to school to pursue her passion? In her telling, I was trying to keep her dependent and small by pushing her toward a field with no financial prospects. The panic attack I had when my father died, she described it on her podcast as me faking a medical emergency to steal the spotlight away from a promotion she'd just received. She was building an empire on the ashes of my reputation. The podcast was a sensation. It was being featured in magazines. Celebrities were tweeting about how brave and inspiring she was. She was the patron saint of scorned women, the unbreakable survivor. And I was her origin story. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Friends who had known us both started looking at me differently. The invitations to barbecues and poker nights dried up. I'd get texts from people saying things like, "Hey man, I heard Isabella's podcast. I never knew you were going through." Well, I guess she was going through all that. I hope you're getting help. They weren't asking for my side of the story, they were delivering a verdict. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. They had known me for years, but a few hours of expertly produced audio from my ex-wife had completely rewritten their perception of me. My relationship with my family became strained. My own sister called me, her voice trembling. "Nate, is any of this true? The things she's saying, they're horrible." I tried to explain, to tell her it was a lie, a performance, but all I could say was, "I can't talk about it, the NDA." To my own family, my silence sounded like guilt. My inability to defend myself was proof of my supposed crimes. Isabella had me in a cage. She could say anything she wanted, and I was legally gagged. If I spoke out, if I broke the NDA, the financial penalties were catastrophic. She could take everything I had left. It was a perfect, diabolical trap. I felt a sense of learned helplessness so profound it was like drowning. Every path I saw led to ruin. The lowest point came about 6 months after the podcast launched. I was seeing someone new. Her name was Leah, and she was kind and funny and had no idea about the storm that was about to hit her. She came over to my place one evening, looking shaken. "I listened to that podcast," she said, not looking at me. "My friends sent it to me. They recognized some of the stories you told me about your marriage. From your perspective." Nate, the way she tells it. I saw the doubt in her eyes. The seed of suspicion that Isabella was so skilled at planting. I tried to reassure her. "Leah, that's not how it happened. She's twisting everything, you know me." "But why can't you defend yourself?" she asked. A reasonable question that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "If it's all lies, why don't you just say that? Why don't you sue her for slander?" "Because I can't," I whispered. "I signed a paper. I promised I wouldn't." She looked at me, and in that moment I wasn't her partner, I was a liability. A man with a dark, secret past that was being broadcast to the world. A man who couldn't even explain himself. She saw the version of me that Isabella had created. A manipulator, a gaslighter, a man who uses legal documents to silence his victims. It was the exact opposite of the truth, but how could she know that? My silence was my condemnation. Leah and I drifted apart soon after that. I didn't blame her. Who would choose to stand in the path of a hurricane like Isabella? I was alone. My business was suffering because my name was becoming toxic in the small Austin creative community. My family was distant. My love life was a crater. Isabella had taken my past, weaponized it, and used it to destroy my future. And all I could do was sit here in my soundproofed room and listen to the applause. The year that followed was a study in isolation. I buried myself in my work, the only place where cause and effect were still reliable. An EQ boost would raise the mids, a compressor would tighten the drums. It was a world of logic and order that stood in stark contrast to the chaotic injustice of my life. Isabella's fame, meanwhile, continued its vertical climb. Unbreakable was now more than a podcast, it was a brand. She had a book deal. She was doing a speaking tour. She was a regular guest on morning talk shows, dispensing wisdom about spotting red flags and escaping narcissistic abuse, all while looking soulfully into the camera. Her success was a constant, throbbing reminder of my defeat. She had created a codependent relationship with her audience, feeding them my life, my memories, and my pain, repackaged as her inspirational journey. I had almost given up hope. I was beginning to resign myself to this half-life, to being the silent villain in the story of Saint Isabella. The NDA felt like a life sentence. But salvation, when it came, wasn't a thunderclap. It was a quiet click. I was in the process of archiving old hard drives, a tedious task I'd been putting off for years. These were drives from before the divorce, full of old recording sessions, forgotten demos, and digital clutter. I was about to wipe one labeled Home Audio, 2018, when a flicker of memory stopped me. In 2018, I had briefly toyed with the idea of starting my own podcast, a passion project about the history of sound design in film. I had bought some semi-professional gear and spent a few weeks recording audio around the house, testing microphones, practicing my narration. The project never went anywhere, and I'd completely forgotten about it. On a whim, I plugged in the drive, and there they were. Dozens of audio files. Hours and hours of raw, unedited sound from inside the house I once shared with Isabella. I started clicking through them, mostly just hearing myself talking about Foley artists and the Wilhelm scream. And then I heard her voice, It was from a file dated June 12, 2018. It was our anniversary. In episode 3 of Unbreakable, she described this day as the height of my emotional abuse. She claimed I had forgotten it completely, and then berated her for being materialistic when she cried. My old microphone had been on, sitting on the kitchen counter, while I was testing its ambient noise pickup. It had recorded everything. First, you hear my voice, tired but gentle. "Hey, happy anniversary. I'm so sorry, Izzy. The deal at work is a monster. I can't get away this weekend, but I got you these. I know they're your favorite." Tuned her voice. Not the gentle, wounded tone of her podcast, but sharp and brittle. "Nate, my friends are all going to Napa, to Paris. And I get a bunch of flowers that are going to be dead in 3 days. I know," my voice says. "And once this commission comes through, I will take you anywhere you want. I promise. I'm doing this for us. For the house. Don't you dare try to gaslight me," she shrieks. And hearing the word used in its proper context by her was a revelation. Don't act like you're doing me a favor by being a workaholic. You're just selfish. You always do this. You make me feel small and cheap." The audio went on for 10 minutes. It was a raw, unfiltered recording of the exact opposite of the story she told on her podcast. It wasn't me gaslighting her. It was her berating me, twisting my apology into an attack. I felt my hands start to shake. I spent the next 48 hours combing through the hard drive. It was an archaeological dig into the truth of my own life. I found a recording of her on the phone with her sister, laughing about how she'd convinced me to sell my vintage guitar collection, which I'd inherited from my father, to help fund her startup fashion blog, which she abandoned 2 months later. On her podcast, she'd framed this as me sabotaging her dreams by refusing to invest in her. I found audio of her admitting to faking a migraine to get out of attending my mother's 60th birthday party. I had dozens of these little snippets of truth, little audio bombs that could blow her entire narrative to pieces. My first thought was to release them, just dump them online and let the world hear the real Isabella. But my lawyer talked me down. "She'll sue you into oblivion, Nate. The NDA is ironclad. It doesn't matter if it's true. You're forbidden from sharing any information, including audio recordings about your marriage." She'd win. He was right. A direct assault was suicide. I had to be smarter. I had to find a way to get the truth out without being the one to say it. I couldn't break the NDA. But what if the truth just appeared? My plan took a month to execute. I knew I couldn't be the source. I had to create a cutout, a third party that couldn't be traced back to me. I found my instrument in the burgeoning world of truth tellers, a rival extramarital affairs podcast that specialized in exposing online frauds and influencers. This one, called The B-Side, was run by an anonymous investigative journalist known only as Veritas. They were ruthless and had a perfect track record. I created a new, encrypted email address from a public library computer. I meticulously edited the audio files, juxtaposing them. First, a clip from Isabella's polished podcast, her voice dripping with sorrow as she told a lie. Then, the raw, unfiltered audio from my hard drive showing the truth in all its ugly glory. I called the file the Unbreakable Tapes. I didn't add any commentary. The audio spoke for itself. I sent the email with the subject line, "The truth has a B-side," and then I wiped the computer and walked away. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I was a nervous wreck, checking the internet constantly. I started to think my email had been ignored, lost in a sea of tips. Then, on a Thursday morning, the B-Side dropped a special, unscheduled episode. The title was simple, Unbreakable, a Special Investigation. Veritas's voice, electronically altered, came on. We were recently sent a collection of audio files that appear to tell a very different story about one of the podcasting world's brightest stars, and then they played it, all of it. The anniversary fight, the phone call about my guitars, every lie systematically dismantled by the sound of her own voice. It was a symphony of self-destruction. The journalists didn't have an NDA. They were just reporting on information they had received from an anonymous source. Legally, I was in the clear. The fallout was nuclear. Within hours, #UnbreakablySbroken was trending on Twitter. Her fans were in a civil war, some defending her, others feeling profoundly betrayed. Her comment sections became a dumpster fire. Her sponsors, terrified of the backlash, started pulling their support one by one. Major news outlets picked up the story. The brave, inspiring survivor was suddenly being recast as a manipulative, pathological liar. Isabella, for the first time in her public life, went silent. Her podcast feed was dead. Her social media was wiped. Her empire, built on a foundation of lies, had crumbled in a single day. I never heard from her directly again. I saw a paparazzi photo of her a few months later, looking haggard and thin, a world away from the polished guru she had played on camera. I felt no joy. I didn't feel vindicated or triumphant. I just felt quiet. The noise that had been suffocating me for 2 years was finally gone. My life slowly pieced itself back together. Leah called me, apologized profusely, and asked for a second chance. My sister and I had a long, tearful conversation where she finally understood everything. My business is thriving. The truth didn't need me to shout it from the rooftops. It just needed a microphone, a hard drive, and a quiet man who had finally found the right way to press play.